As a genealogist, I constantly see how history isn't just some dry list of dates or macro events. It's really woven from the lives of ordinary people, people who stepped up when the absolute unimaginable happened. So today, in this explainer, we're taking a historical documentary approach. We're going to sift through the literal ashes of a massive 1908 disaster in East Boston. And by following a meticulously preserved archival trail, we're talking newspaper clippings, medical logs, old mortuary records, we're going to resurrect the completely forgotten story of a man named Daniel Sullivan.
Right, so let's drop right into the sweltering heat of Boston on July 8, 1908. The weather had been brutal, extremely hot, which left these massive wooden structures on the waterfront just dangerously dry. Sometime around 4:12 in the afternoon, the unthinkable starts. The Boston Herald the very next day ran a staggering headline. A fire had just swept the East Boston wharves. Now, the exact cause, it was never definitively proven. Some folks believed it started in bales of wool, while others circulated this wild rumor that a passing tugboat expelled a rogue spark. It drifted through an open window of the north shed and ignited a simple crate of onions of all things. But whatever that initial spark was, the result was catastrophic. Within just 15 minutes, fanned by these brisk northern winds, the entire massive wooden Cunard pier was totally enveloped in blistering flames. It moved so fast that clerks inside the Cunard office desperately grabbed their ledger books, realized they couldn't even use the stairs, and literally had to drop from the windows directly to the ground just to survive.
To get a sense of the sheer, terrifying geography of this thing, imagine standing on those docks. You've got gale force winds hitting 34 miles per hour, whipping the flames laterally straight across the waterfront. Within 10 minutes, an entire dock, we're talking 750 feet long by 220 feet wide, is completely engulfed. The inferno just relentlessly pushed toward the Grand Junction wharves and the Leyland Line Pier. Out on the water, the Cunard steam launch, the Dolphin, which executives used to travel across the harbor, was completely destroyed. And amidst all this chaos, there was this incredibly narrow escape. The massive immigrant ship, the Ivernia, was actually scheduled to berth at this exact ruined location the very next day. Thankfully, she was diverted at the very last moment to the Boston and Maine docks, which narrowly avoided what would have been a catastrophic loss of immigrant life.
When the smoke finally started to clear, the scale of destruction was just almost impossible to process. A full quarter-mile of the bustling East Boston waterfront just wiped off the map, gone. The financial loss was astronomical for the time, valued at over $1 million, which was a staggering fortune in 1908. But, the true tragedy was way beyond the dollar signs. It was the profound human cost. Deep in the smoldering ruins of the North Shed, a man was missing. 2 days later, on July 10th, recovery crews actually went in and attempted to search for his remains. But the heat radiating from those massive piles of charred timber and collapsed iron was still so impossibly intense, they had to call the entire search off. His body was never recovered.
That missing man? That was Daniel Sullivan. A secondary headline from the time paints a really devastating picture of this micro-tragedy. Pensioner lost his life in fire through his devotion to duty. Daniel was 7 years old. He'd been connected with the Cunard line for 40 years. And on the day of the fire, he was working as a watchman right at the very end of the North Shed, exactly where the blaze began. And here's the thing about Daniel. He didn't just run. He discovered the fire, he sounded the alarm to save others, and then, showing just incredible devotion to duty, he went back into the inferno to try and check the flames himself. He was never seen again.
To really understand the gravity of Daniel's sacrifice, as a genealogist, I have to retrace his steps. Because long before he was the heroic watchman of the East Boston Inferno, he was just an immigrant searching for a better life. He was born in County Cork, Ireland, in May of 1843, right on the cusp of the Great Famine, one of 10 children. He crosses the Atlantic, arrives in Boston in November 1860, stepping off the boat into a nation right on the brink of the Civil War. By 1868, he marries his wife Honora at the Holy Redeemer Church. We can look at census records from 1870, and we see Daniel, Honora, and their infant son Timothy starting their American dream in a modest tenement at 39 Haynes Street in East Boston. And then, in 1876, he proudly becomes an American citizen. Daniel's life is literally the classic, hard-fought journey of the 19th century Irish immigrant.
Now, we actually don't have a photograph of Daniel, but the historical archives still let us see him. How? Well, thanks to a meticulous medical examination he underwent in April 1883 for a fraternal organization, we have his exact physical dimensions, recorded in pen and ink. Daniel was a towering 6 feet 6 inches tall, and he weighed a solid 220 pounds. I mean, just imagine the imposing, commanding presence of this guy striding across the wooden wharves in the 1880s, clad in the heavy wool trousers, canvas suspenders, and thick work shirts of the era. He was a literal giant of a man, built for the absolute punishing labor of the waterfront, watching over these massive steamships as they brought thousands of new immigrants into the very same harbor he had sailed into decades before.
And that massive frame? It served him incredibly well over a 40-year career with the Cunard Line. But the waterfront was an unforgiving environment. His job changed over the decades, which really reflects a lifetime of grueling physical labor. He started out as a roustabout, a general laborer doing the heavy lifting of cargo. Then he worked as a teamster, driving those heavy horse-drawn wagons of freight. His dedication and that commanding presence eventually earned him the title of foreman. But then, tragedy struck on the docks. Daniel suffered a severe on-the-job injury. The damage was so bad that this 6'6" titan could no longer perform the heavy labor that a foreman had to do. In a really bitter twist of irony, that career-ending injury relegated him directly to his final fateful role, a pensioner working as a watchman. So while Daniel's death was a very public tragedy, his life was marked by immense private sorrow. When we reconstruct the Sullivan family ledger from birth and death records, it reveals a harsh, unforgiving reality of 19th century tenement life. Daniel and Honora had 7 children. Their youngest 2, Honora and William Patrick, died in 1885 at just 6 and 4 years old. Then in the early 1890s, they lost Nellie at 20, John at 19, and Mary at 15. Before the turn of the century, Daniel and Honora had outlived 5 of their 7 children. 5! The emotional weight that this family carried, it's just almost incomprehensible. Out of 7 kids, only Timothy and Daniel survived to give them grandchildren.
Knowing firsthand the absolute fragility of life on the docks and in the tenements, Daniel made a decision back in 1883 that would ultimately save his widow from total destitution. He became a charter member of the Linden Court of the Massachusetts Catholic Order of Foresters. Now, this fraternal organization functioned as a vital social safety net for working-class Catholic immigrants. Basically, members paid into a fund that provided a death benefit to their widows and orphans. It was a primitive but absolutely essential form of life insurance in an era way before government welfare. This foresight on his part proved vital, but after the 1908 fire, his family faced a massive legal hurdle.
See, because Daniel's body was completely incinerated in the Inferno, there was no physical proof of death, and the foresters strictly required that proof to pay out a mortuary claim. His widow, Honora, who was now living with her son's family, desperately needed those funds. So in August 1908, a lawyer named Joseph A. Sheehan stepped in. He actually tracked down Alfred Fischler, the superintendent of the Cunard Line Pier. Fischler provided a signed statement confirming he had been in direct conversation with Daniel right near the end of the pier's west side, just 15 minutes before the alarm sounded. Armed with this, Sheehan submitted a legal argument stating it was, and I quote, fair and reasonable to suppose and assume that the said Daniel Sullivan was burned to death. That critical piece of paperwork, proving his exact location, forced the release of the death benefit to his grieving family.
And that paper trail generated by Daniel's death, it didn't just disappear into a drawer. It was meticulously preserved. Today, the Massachusetts Catholic Order of Foresters mortuary records are safely held at the UMass Boston Healey Library. Spanning from 1880 to 1946, these records are the spectacular, highly personal time capsule. Daniel's story is literally just one of thousands. These archives hold detailed death claims of victims from the tragic Great Molasses Flood of 1919, casualties of the catastrophic 1918 influenza epidemic, soldiers lost in World War I, and countless victims of everyday industrial accidents. They represent the unfiltered, authentic history of working-class people whose lives might otherwise be entirely lost to time.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this thought. Daniel Sullivan was a towering 70-year-old immigrant who gave his life to warn others. He was a man who endured unimaginable family tragedy, yet his legacy was preserved by a single medical exam and a lawyer's letter. There are millions of stories just like his, sleeping quietly in archival boxes across the world, just waiting for someone to dust them off. The preservation of our past relies on the genealogists, the archivists, and frankly, the curious among us. So I have to ask you, if a disaster struck your city a century ago, who would be telling your family's story today? History is out there waiting to be found. Go out there and start digging.